Well, good evening. My name is Diane Lapis, and welcome to the program, The Beacon Hebrew Alliance and the Story of the Jewish Experience in Beacon. In May of this year, the Beacon Hebrew Alliance celebrated 100 years of serving the community in both religious practices and social justice programs. Tonight's presentation is a collaboration between the Beacon Historical Society and the Beacon Hebrew Alliance. Together, we set out to discover the history of the formation of the synagogue and the story of Jewish immigrants to our city. We use materials from both the BHS and the BHA's archives, oral histories, photos, and stories from members, as well as help from a Yiddish translator. We're excited to share what we have learned. Before we begin, let's step back 300 years to learn about America's earliest Jewish settler. In 1716, Louis Moses Gomez, of Jewish, Spanish, Portuguese descent, bought 1,200 acres of land in Marlborough, New York, 5 miles north of Newburgh, where a fieldstone blockhouse and other structures were built to mill lumber and process limestone to support his successful enterprises in colonial New York City. It wasn't until 160 years later that we saw an influx of Jewish immigrants in our region. Though the Gomez Mill House is currently closed for renovations, starting in May 2022, you can visit the oldest standing Jewish heritage site in North America and hear Gomez's story. And you can visit their website and learn more at gomez.org. Most of the Jewish settlers to Beacon came from Russia, Poland, and what was then Austria-Hungary. They came as part of the big wave of 2.5 million Eastern European Jews emigrating to North America, seeking religious freedom, political liberty, and economic and educational opportunities during the years 1881 to 1924. It wasn't all rosy for the Jews that settled in New York City, their first port of entry. What brought them to migrate further north to Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess County may have been the need to escape unfair labor practices, overcrowded tenements, and difficulty assimilating into an unfamiliar culture. I'm going to digress for a minute. And for those of you who don't know, Beacon became a city in 1913 when the twin villages of Fishkill Landing and Matawan merged. Geographically, Matawan starts at North Chestnut Street by where Rite Aid is today and runs east up to Mount Beacon. Fishkill Landing went from North Chestnut and ran west to the river. Now, the first Jewish settler in Matawan was Gustavus Jackson, referred to as the Hebrew or Jew Jackson, to distinguish him from the Jacksons that ran the carriage manufacturers in Fishkill Landing. The census lists him as residing here in 1849. Jackson was the first director of the Matawan National Bank in 1893 and owned a clothing store, as you can see by his business card, with his son Willie. The first Jewish resident in Fishkill Landing was Samuel Snideman. He immigrated from Russia around 1886 when he was 18 years old and opened a tailor shop. In this photo, you can see Mr. Snideman in the lower right corner, and the sign above says Taylor S. Snideman. Next to Mr. Snideman's store is Samuel Beskin's clothing house, another Jewish immigrant that we'll talk about later in the program. In Matawan and Fishkill Landing, Jews lived alongside the Christians who, like them, had fled poverty and oppression in their native land. In the old country, many Jews were merchants and continued their trade in America, serving those that worked in factories and farms. A shared language may have helped these Jewish merchants. Not only could they speak Yiddish, they also spoke Russian, German, Hungarian, Polish, and other Slavic languages and dialects. Like every other ethnic group, the Jews tended to concentrate in specific geographic areas and engage in similar economic activities. Settling in Beacon provided opportunities for jobs and a close cultural and religious community. As part of the grant that we are engaged in for the Hebrew Alliance through the Community Foundation, we engaged a Yiddish translator to search the Yiddish press for articles and advertisements about Fishkill Landing, Matawan, and Beacon. We were curious to see how Beacon was portrayed or promoted to the Jewish community in New York City. Here are two advertisements from the Central Hudson Line publicizing a getaway from Manhattan. For $1, one could, quote, take a delightful trip in the season because of the lovely colors and autumn views. In the ad in the lower right, one of BHA's founding members, Louis Sayeta, advertised farmland for purchase on Mount Beacon in 1919. The Yiddish press reported often on the news and antics at the Matawan Insane Asylum. For example, there were over 160 news articles from 1900 to 1930. Of particular interest was the reporting on Camp Nishkadaiget, a Jewish communist camp located in Dutchess Junction from 1922 to the mid-50s, shedding light on this vanished utopia. For more information about that camp, you can look on our website, beaconhistorical.org, under Explore, and read an article that I wrote about it.
So by 1921, there were a dozen or more Jewish families in Beacon. They had established businesses up and down Main Street and were active in the life of the city. The only problem was there was no synagogue or Jewish cemetery. To practice their faith and receive the Torah, they had to cross the river on a ferry to go to Newburgh or travel north 20 miles to Poughkeepsie. This became impractical, so they started to gather at each other's houses and businesses to pray together. Eventually, they decided to form their own congregation, and the Beacon Hebrew Alliance was incorporated on May 27, 1921. In the first few decades of its existence, BHA was an Orthodox congregation. The main priorities of Orthodox Jews at the time were observance of the Sabbath, adherence to kosher dietary laws, development of ongoing religious education, and support of charitable activities. Later, in the 1960s, BHA became a part of the conservative Jewish movement, which developed modern practices for American Jews while preserving Judaism's integral traditions and values. You will recognize Samuel Snideman as one of the first trustees of BHA. We'll talk about some of the other founders more later, but for now, let's look at the early activities of the newly formed Beacon Hebrew Alliance. BHA was very busy in the early days of its existence, as we can see from these board minutes from 1922 and 23. The yearly dues for membership were $8, soon to be raised to $18 as expenses rose and fundraising for the new synagogue got underway. The Ladies' Aid Society raised the sum of $130 to purchase BHA's first Torah, which is still used today. In response to the continued suffering of Jewish refugees in Europe after World War I, BHA members raised a whopping $1,043 for the American Jewish War Relief, which is equivalent to $17,000 today. They also hired their first rabbi, Rabbi Levine, to help prepare young people for their B'nai Mitzvahs, when they would be initiated as full adults in the religious community, and also to lead weddings and important services. BHA members also began to explore locations and plans to build a synagogue building. Early services and meetings were often held above Schumann's Army and Navy store, owned and operated by Sidney Schumann, near where the DMV building is now on Main Street. BHA met there at Foresters Hall and other locations for years before the present sanctuary was built. Sid and his wife Rose had two daughters, Eleanor Harrison and Sidel Ligatino. Later, Sidel and her husband ran Schumann's Army and Navy store in its second location, further east on Main Street. Sid and Rose Schumann were both active in civic and religious charitable organizations in the community, as were most of the early Jewish settlers. We'll discuss that later in the program. Fundraising for the new BHA building was chaired by Sid Schumann and Mrs. Fannie Miller. Fanny was the president of the Ladies' Aid Society of BHA, which was a separately incorporated entity comprised of Jewish women who were married or widowed to male members of BHA. Fanny Miller owned Miller Clothing Store at 342 Main Street on the corner of Teller Avenue and was highly respected in the Beacon business community. Sid and Fanny worked their connections to raise funds for the BHA building. When they reached pledges of $6,000, they sought out support in the local community. According to the Beacon News, the local paper at that time, $1,700 for the building was raised by non-members, local residents, and businesses. One name you might recognize is Henry Morgenthau Jr., Secretary of the Treasury under FDR, who donated $100. His family still owns Fishkill Farms.
The building's construction, headed by James Lynch, a noted builder in Beacon, began in the summer of 1929, with a deadline to be ready for the Jewish New Year. Amazingly, Lynch and his crew completed the work within a half hour of the Rosh Hashanah services. Lynch donated some of the building supplies from his lumberyard, and the Obed Lodge masons aided in the construction. 1929 was a busy year in Beacon. The synagogue, the Mattawan National Bank, the Mechanic Savings Bank, the Nabisco Box Plant, South Avenue School, Spoonmakers, and the East Main Street Bridge were all built that year. The demand for labor and the construction of a new synagogue created a new influx of Jewish immigrants who had first settled in New York City, then moved upriver to Beacon. The opening celebration of the temple included Beacon's Mayor Alfred Russell and Judge Thomas Hassett, with representatives from the Protestant and Catholic churches, and Rabbi Bloom and Rabbi Blatt from Newburgh. Now, please note the two cornerstones on the left and right side of the building. I don't know if you can see where my arrow is. There's one here and one here. So the one on the left side is marked 5689, indicating the Jewish calendar year. Placed inside the cornerstone, and I'm not sure which one, was a Bible, documents from the building committee and the Ladies' Aid Society, a history of BHA, a list of donors, and of the Masons who helped build it. Rabbi Brackman of the Jewish Welfare Board of New York was the guest speaker at the laying of the cornerstone. He said, quote, "The tolerance between the Jews and the non-Jews, which I have found in Beacon at the dedication of the house of God, seems to me to be the beginning of the fulfillment of the prophecy of old. Quote, my house shall be called the house of worship for all peoples." Notice the Dennings Point bricks were used in the construction of the building, featuring their newest product called Red Corrugated Face. David Strickland, the manager at that time, donated a large portion of the bricks. Perhaps your home features this style brick.
On June 24th, 2021, I followed BHA's cantor Ellen Pearson Gersh as she gave a tour of the shul to the Rosenthal family, who are descendants of Beacon's second mayor, Samuel Beskin. In this video, Ellen first gives some of the history of BHA and then shows the family the inside of the building. Because it was during COVID times, we were all wearing masks, and the building hadn't been occupied for over a year. Ellen narrates most of the tour, but I have inserted some of my own narration where necessary to describe the features of the building. You might want to turn up your volume at this time so you can hear the video better.
These are the founding members, and actually they met in various places on Main Street for about 8 years until they could afford to buy the land and build a building, and also to buy the cemetery.
Okay.
The cemetery originally was a farm, and the guy did not want to sell it to Jews. But what happened was this guy, David Alper, who was the president at the time, had a friend that knew the guy who owned the farm, and he wasn't Jewish, and said, here, take the money, buy the property. So he took the money, bought the property, and it's now our cemetery.
Okay.
So that's how we acquired the land up there. How much?
I'm curious, how much of the building is original to 1929, or was the building here, or did they
Okay,
build
no,
it?
they built this one.
They built this
There
one.
was nothing here. So this was here, this is the old part. That has, well, okay, so I can show you a little bit of the building. So, this was added on. We have a sanctuary downstairs, because initially we didn't have that chairlift. So people couldn't get upstairs. So we had Saturday morning services we had down here. And then prior to that, these were classrooms. So that was in the 60s, because that's when I went to Hebrew school. Before, this wasn't here, I can't, and this was all redone. And that's the kitchen.
Which is the center of a lot of
Definitely
life in this synagogue. Now we're heading up the stairs of BHA. This is the landing with a plaque dedicated to Leo Ritter, who was a very long time devoted member of BHA. His whole family were founders, and he donated the Matzur, which are the books we use for the High Holy Days. Now we're entering the BHA sanctuary. You can see the rows of pews, and in the background is the bima, which is the place where the Torahs are stored in the ark. That's the wooden archway. Behind the curtain are the Torah scrolls. The illuminated stained glass windows in the sanctuary are inscribed with verses of Torah, and they're each dedicated to a founding member of BHA. There are 10 windows in the sanctuary, which is a significant number because there are 10 people required to have a minyan to read Torah. The plaques in the back of the sanctuary have the names of members who have passed on, and each month of the year that relates to the anniversary of their death or their yahrzeit, their plaques are lit up.
It's, and you know, when it's really sunny, like if you're sitting here, the colors like bounce off of the pews. It's gorgeous. It really is beautiful. The acoustics in here, when you sing, it's just,
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Va'ed.
This plaque is hanging inside the Beacon Hebrew Alliance entryway, which you saw in the video, and it commemorates the members that helped erect the building in 1929. And it is also a veritable list of business, civic, and faith leaders that emigrated to Beacon at the turn of the century. In the next few slides, we'll learn about some of these leaders whose presence is still felt in the community today. Samuel Beskin was a founding member of BHA and a leading member of the community. His story was a true rags to riches one. He arrived in Fishkill Landing about 1894 from Russia as a poor street peddler who spoke little English. Within 20 years, he established himself as a successful businessman, operating a hotel, a bottling works, an apartment house, 2 department stores, the second one with Beacon's first elevator, and he bought the bankrupt Overland Headwear Company. He held an important position as a state road contractor under Governor Al Smith, helping to build the Ashokan Dam, among other projects. He was Beacon's second mayor from 1917 to 1921. On the left of the screen, you can see his gavel that Mr. Rosenthal brought in to show us. And it says Samuel Beskin of Beacon with the dates 1917 to 1921 that he used as the mayor. And in our collection, we have amazingly Beskin's business card that you see on the screen, as well as a number of bottles that were made in his bottling works. Beskin married Anna Glick, the sister of Max Glick, another founder of BHA, who worked in his saloon in Beacon. Max may have helped Beskin start up his first dry goods store in Beacon. While Beskin was unable to see a completed building built in his lifetime, he was not only a founding member of BHA, but also served on its board in 1923 until his untimely death in 1924. Samuel Kahn was another founding member of BHA. It was said that he was an avid student of the Torah. He married Minnie Beskin, Sam Beskin's sister, and owned a dry goods store at 172 Main Street that featured men's, women's, and children's furnishings and shoes. The tiled entryway to his store can still be seen at the new Ron's World Guitar Gallery. Minnie and Samuel had two children, Goldie and Simon. Both children were longtime members. Goldie married Julius Ginsburg, also a longtime member, and we believe a former president of BHA. Simon Kahn became a dentist and was president of BHA for many years. Dr. Kahn married Sadie Jane Efron of Poughkeepsie in 1937. Sadie assisted him in his dental practice for 45 years, and that was located above Sam Kahn's dry goods store at 172 Main. In the image above, you can see Dr. Kahn and Sadie Jane in 1943, just before he reported for active duty in the Army during World War II. The Kahns had two children, Stuart, who is president of the New York investment bank firm Kahn Capital Corp., and Richard, who died of polio at age 17. Sadie graduated Vassar in 1933. She was actively involved in a number of organizations within BHA and the greater community, including Poughkeepsie's Jewish Community Center, Vassar College Alumni Association, Mount St. Mary's College, the United Jewish Appeal, and the Fishkill National Bank, to name a few. Sadie Jane died in 2012 at the age of 101. And in the front of BHA, we have a garden dedicated in her name. Osher Bernstein came to Beacon from New York City in 1911. He was actually passing through when a car accident landed him at Highland Hospital. He was so impressed with the city and its possibilities that he decided to make a living here. He owned and operated the Guarantee clothing store, advertised as selling high-class women's apparel at moderate prices. His slogan was, "The house where quality counts." He also held a large amount of real estate. Two of his sons went into business in Beacon. The third opened a furniture store in Peekskill. Nathan Bernstein took over his father's store following Asher's death in 1933. The store was considered the height of luxury, selling Mallory, Stetson, and Pencraft hats for men and fine ladies' dresses. Later, Nate Bernstein ran a shoe store where many Beaconites bought their shoes. Max Bernstein ran an auto supply store on Main Street and later a toy store across from the Howland Cultural Center. Max also served in World War I and is noted for filming a series of home movies of Beacon soldiers during World War II. Max Werber and his wife Rebecca came to Beacon in 1929. Max started the Werber Leather Coat Company in New York City, then moved to Poughkeepsie in 1921. 6 years later, they moved to Beacon and converted a silk factory to house the leather firm that you can see here. The story of the Werber Coat Company is filled with economic hardships, labor disputes, fisticuffs, arson, strikes, and battles with insurance companies. Notwithstanding, Werber jackets were used throughout the country, especially during World War II. They continued producing jackets until 1960.
Max and Bertha Ginsburg were founding members of BHA and owners and proprietors of 3 movie theaters in the area, including the Beacon Theater, whose building still stands at 445 Main Street and is home to Story Screen Beacon now. Max and Bertha had 4 sons, Benjamin, Louis, Murray, and Jacob, who were members of BHA. Benjamin was the manager of the theater, and his brother Julius opened the popular Wonder Bar over the theater with his partner Tommy Hanlon, who eventually took over the business. Julius's son Bernard ran the theater until it closed in the late 1960s. Dr. Harold Ginsburg is a lifelong member of BHA who still lives in Beacon at the age of 90. He was Benjamin Ginsburg's son and has many fond memories growing up and working in the theater. Here's a clip from an audio interview with him in 2017 describing the theater.
It was described as far as movie theaters are concerned as the movie palace between Yonkers and Albany, or maybe Yonkers and Hudson. It was built and opened in 1934, and it was quite luxurious. We changed the program 3 times a week. The same movie would play Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Wednesday was a separate day, lesser movies, but you'd have something like bank night, or give away dishes, or give away encyclopedias. And then the next was Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays. And at the time, I'm going back to the 40s and 50s, motion picture theaters were very, very popular. It was the major form of entertainment besides people going to a bar.
Hyman Pomerantz was a founder of BHA and on the original 1921 board of directors. He was born in Russia in 1873 and emigrated to America with his wife Rachel in 1900. He and Rachel had 4 children, Joseph, Gertrude, Miriam, and Julius. His oldest son, Joseph, helped him run Pommy's Hotel and Restaurant, which was located at 246 Main Street, the same place that Max's on Main currently is today. In fact, the bar in Max's is the original bar from Pommy's. Hyman's brother-in-law, David Pomerantz, also ran a tavern in Beacon and was a member of BHA. Of interest today, in light of COVID restrictions, we found this newspaper article from October 1918 about a fight between local saloon owners, including Mr. Pomerantz, and the Commissioner of Public Safety, who had ordered all saloons to be closed as a health precaution during the 1918 influenza epidemic. The saloon keepers refused to stop serving customers, and some of them were arrested, including Mr. Pomerantz. Samuel Beskin was mayor of Beacon at the time, and he sided with the saloon keepers. Hyman Pomerantz was a very devout Jewish man. According to his great-granddaughter, Karen Moses, who was Karen Morgenstern, is pictured here as a 3-year-old on his lap. According to her, Hyman Pomerantz is buried on the Mount of Olives in Israel, which was his dying wish. Dr. Louis Rogan was the son of Hyman and Tilly Rosinski. He was a dentist and had an office on Fishkill Avenue between BHA and Main Street. Later, when he was ready to retire, he passed his practice on to Dr. Harold Ginsburg, who we heard in a previous slide, and he ran it for another 50 years. Lou was an active member of the shul and served as center director and other committees. Dr. Lou Rogan married Miriam or Mimi Pomerantz, the daughter of Hyman and Rachel Pomerantz. Mimi spent her entire life in Beacon and was devoted to her family and to serving the Jewish community. Lou and Mimi had 2 daughters, Beverly Locker and longtime BHA member Audrey Morgenstern. Lou and Mimi's grandchildren, Karen Moses and David Morgenstern, have fond memories of their grandparents. Their grandfather, Lou in particular, was full of antics. Karen recalled a story from when Lou and Mimi were first married, and Lou stayed out all night playing cards at the Elks Club. Mimi locked the doors to their apartment so that Lou had no choice but to show up to shul very early on that Saturday morning. His father-in-law, Hyman Pomerantz, was so impressed to see his son-in-law there for the minyan that he gave him a special aliyah, a reading from the Torah, and admonished his own son for not showing up on time. Lou went from being in the doghouse with his wife to becoming the apple of his father-in-law's eye. Abraham Lewis and his wife, Martha Yazgor, were born in Shmogan, White Russia. Abraham left Russia to avoid conscription into the Russian army during the Russo-Japanese War and settled in Newburgh. Later, they moved to Beacon when Abraham began to work at the Mace's hat factory. Abraham's ability to speak Russian, Polish, and English helped him to earn the position of foreman. When the factory closed during the Depression, the Lewises ran a small grocery store at 334 Main Street. According to his grandson, Albert Green, the Lewis's stores supplied food to the communist Jewish camp Nishkadaiget, mentioned earlier in our presentation. Abe and Martha Lewis had 2 children, Simon and Ethel. Ethel was very involved in the BHA Sisterhood and in the National Sisterhood Organization. Dr. Simon Lewis was a dentist in Beacon and was involved in the BHA B'nai B'rith Youth Organization. The legacy of the Lewises at BHA runs deep. Abraham Lewis pledged he would donate a Torah if his son Simon made it safely home from World War II. Simon did, and Abraham donated a Torah to BHA. Grandson Albert Green told us, "I always went to shul with my grandfather. We couldn't go to public school during the holidays, even for Passover. My grandfather was very religious and he passed it on to me." Barnett and Esther Pearson were founding members of BHA, and their descendants, 4 generations and counting, continue to be active members of BHA. Barnett and Esther were living in New York City and working in the clothing industry when their son, Meyer, almost fell out of their apartment window. This prompted them to move out of the city, first going to Woodridge, New York, and then moving to Beacon, which was closer to New York City and a thriving Jewish community. Barnett was a clothing designer and manufacturer. They had 2 stores, one in Beacon and one in Cold Spring. Granddaughter Beth Pearson recalled that her grandfather would take the train into New York City to sketch the latest designs in the shop windows and then design and produce his own clothing to sell in their stores. Barnett and Esther had 3 children, Meyer, Leona, and George. George and Leona Pearson are the stylish young people sitting in the roadster on the lower right. George Pearson stayed in the community and became a chemistry and math teacher and then a guidance counselor at Beacon High School. Let's listen to a clip of his daughter Ellen describing his work in the community.
To this day, sometimes I run into people coming back to Beacon. It's a little strange. And they will recognize me like, "Oh, Ellen Pearson, and I'm, blah, blah. And, "Oh, your father, he saved me." And I've heard of stories like, my parents never took me to the dentist. We couldn't afford it. And your father had a friend, actually Cy Lewis, who was a member of the synagogue. And he would see them for free. And then Vogels, who was also a member of the synagogue, would give them like free things, toothbrushes, toothpaste, things like that. So yeah, he loved guidance. I think he touched a lot of kids. Yeah.
So George married Evelyn Wolfe, a fellow teacher at Beacon High School, and they had 2 daughters, Beth and Ellen Pearson. Beth and Ellen grew up in Beacon going to BHA and both had an intense love for Jewish learning. Beth wanted to become a rabbi and Ellen aspired to become a cantor, but the Jewish Theological Seminary was not yet admitting women to rabbinical or cantorial school. Instead, Beth became an attorney for Child Protective Services, and Ellen enrolled in Columbia University's Teachers College and Manhattan School of Music, and studied privately with rabbis and cantors who were willing to train her in the Jewish liturgical tradition. In the late 1990s, times had changed, and Ellen was encouraged by BHA's longtime rabbi, Carol Davidson, to become a cantor. Ellen served as cantor at Greenwich Reformed Synagogue in Connecticut before returning to Beacon and becoming BHA's first full-time cantor.
For the Jewish families of Beacon, keeping kosher was an essential part of daily life, and it usually fell on the wife and mother of the household to maintain a kosher kitchen. As early as 1922, the Ladies' Aid Society was trying to entice a kosher butcher to open shop in Beacon. By 1934, Louis Gold was running a kosher meat market at 174 Main Street. Later, Fenster's Kosher Butcher shop opened on the east end of Main Street and served the community in the 1950s and 60s. The founding members of BHA actively participated in American and Jewish benevolent groups and civic organizations. Local newspaper articles and the Fireman's Souvenir Program from 1921 provided mini bios of Jewish merchants listing their involvement and or membership in local concerns, such as the Chamber of Commerce, the school board and athletic teams, town youth programs, and the Highland Hospital. There were other groups that provided Jewish members protection and an opportunity to engage in charitable activities, such as the Masons, the Oddfellows, the Elks, and the Foresters of America. Jewish merchants also served as trustees at local banks, were active in the fire companies, the Beacon and Dutchess County Red Cross and Castle Point, and marched in the Chandler Drum Corps. A few of the Jewish organizations and societies that they participated in are listed on the screen. While women could not be official members of BHA, they formed their own organization in 1922, known as the Hebrew Ladies' Aid Society, which had its own president, officers, and members. In 1952, the Hebrew Ladies' Aid Society changed their name to the Sisterhood of the Beacon Hebrew Alliance, a chapter of the National Women's League under the auspices of the United Synagogue of America. The primary function of the sisterhood was to raise funds for BHA. They had committees for all sorts of different revenue-generating programs, including selling candy and golden books, organizing rummage sales and card parties, running food sales, and running the gift shop. One of their biggest and most successful fundraisers was an annual businessmen's luncheon. According to BHA's board minutes in 1954, the sisterhood raised $2,400 to support major renovations to the synagogue, amounting to $24,000 today.
BHA elected Rabbi Levine, no first name provided, in November 1922 as the first Beacon rabbi at the rate of $15 per week. In a history of the Beacon Hebrew Alliance written in 1996 by Tilly Shapiro and Sadie Jane Kahn, they wrote, Rabbi Levine also served as the Hebrew school teacher and the shohet. This was before the synagogue was built and services were held in a variety of halls and homes in Beacon. Starting by the 1960s, the religious school at BHA had really grown. We have many oral history accounts of people who attended the religious school and had their b'nai mitzvahs at BHA during this time. It is also when girls were allowed to have bat mitzvahs at BHA, although they were not able to have full Torah services like the boys. The religious education consisted of two programs, Sunday school and Talmud Torah. The Sunday school was for younger children and was taught by women from the sisterhood. The curriculum consisted of Bible stories, learning about the holidays and Israel, and doing craft projects. Talmud Torah was for the older children who were preparing for their b'nai mitzvahs. These lessons took place 2 days a week in the afternoons after school and were focused on learning the prayers in Hebrew. While most of the kids back then didn't like going to Sunday school or memorizing long prayers in Hebrew, they felt very close with the other Jewish families at the shul, and many told us they formed strong friendships that continue to this day. Of note, the boy in the lower right corner is Dr. Harold Ginsburg's son, Stuart Ginsburg, at his bar mitzvah. Today, BHA is a thriving community of almost 200 member families. In the past decade, under the leadership of Rabbi Brent Haim-Spodek, BHA has brought together, broadly speaking, two Jewish communities in Beacon, one with long roots here and a fondness for the old traditions, and one that is newer to BHA and a bit wary of religious institutions. BHA has responded to the various needs of its members by offering many different ways to practice Jewish ritual and prayer, from contemplative hikes to weekly morning minyans. BHA has learning programs for people of all ages, a garden preschool based on Jewish values, and hosts community and social justice initiatives that are open to everyone, whether they are Jewish or not. BHA has also forged strong interfaith partnerships with several other houses of worship in Beacon, including the First Presbyterian Church, Salem Tabernacle, Church of God in Christ, and Masjid ar-Rashid Islamic Teaching Center, to name a few. These community ties became very important to BHA in late October 2018, after the mass shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh by a white supremacist, and the appearance of anti-Semitic leaflets in several churches in Beacon and Dutchess County. The entire faith community showed up at BHA the next day to protect Jewish children coming to Sunday school. And within a week, they had organized an interfaith rally at Salem Tabernacle that was attended by hundreds of people in support of Jews and people of all races and faiths. Like 100 years ago, we have been battling a deadly pandemic that has upended all of our lives. Over the past year and a half, BHA's clergy and staff have remained flexible and worked incredibly hard to find alternative spaces for religious prayer and instruction. Since the spring of 2021, BHA has been finding ways to come together in person again and redefine what it means to be a synagogue for this community. In addition, plans are being made to renovate the 91-year-old building to make it safe and welcoming to all. Now, as BHA reopens and celebrates its centennial, it is fitting to look back at the shul's founding and appreciate the order in which BHA was built. Community first, then Torah, giving aid to others, and after that, building a synagogue. May we always be blessed by the memories of these founders and find strength and inspiration from them.
So we'd like to thank a very long list of people, that too many to name. That's why we grouped them by the committees and volunteers at the Historical Society and at the Hebrew Alliance. So thank you for all your help in providing information for us. So our centennial celebrations will continue until the end of May 2022. The centerpieces will be a virtual and physical exhibition about Jewish history in Beacon, made in partnership with the Hebrew Alliance and the Historical Society. We'll also have a self-guided walking tour of Beacon's historical Jewish Main Street. You can learn more about it at the BHA's website at beaconhebrewalliance.org. Leading up to these events, we're conducting oral history interviews, collecting photos, artifacts, and ephemera from BHA's history, and creating a permanent archive at BHA. So if you have any photos or stories to share about BHA or Jewish history in Beacon, please contact us at BHA Centennial 2021 at Gmail. It's on the screen. And at this point, I am going to, before we begin our Q&A, I would like just to make an announcement that our next program will take us back to the 19th century, where we will learn about the A.T. Stewart Mills in Glenham. The Zoom program will be presented by design historian Sarah Johnson, who specializes in material culture from the 19th to the 21st century. And again, please look for us on Instagram or Facebook for our most up-to-date information. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions that are in the chat or any comments that you'd like to make. James, can you unmute yourself, please, James?
Yes, thank you. My name is Jim Hag. I'm in Chesterfield, Virginia. But my grandfather, James Lynch, was very instrumental and proud of his connection with the Alliance. And I remember stories of helping to build the building, and many visits with Cy and Sadie Khan, both as a patient at their practice and at their house, and tragic loss of one of their sons. I just want to reminisce a little bit about the ecumenical nature of the community. Being Catholic, we were a family of builders, and the Irish-German element were very much aligned with the professional Jewish element. In addition to the Khans, I can recall Doctors Frank, Munn, and Kaplan having a medical practice, and many other professionals. And I just want to thank you for mentioning his contribution, and thank you very much for putting this on. It was very informative.
Thank you, Jim. I would love if you had any photographs of Mr. Lynch, because we don't have any. And
I
would love-
do. I have photographs. Of course, he was chairman of the board of Fishkill National Bank, and the Khans were and members of that. I also have the original gavel when he was the chairman. I'll try to send it up to the society, as well as I think I have some literature about the dedication or the if there was any things I can find in the file about the building itself, I will try to send it to you. Thanks, Diane.
And also, I'm sorry, Mr. Hogg, he was such an important person in terms of building homes,
Yes.
hundreds and hundreds of homes in Beacon. He did Camp Nishkadaigat, he did University Settlement Camp. He was a very important contractor in our community. So
Yes.
any information, I'd love to connect with you on that. That would be so amazing.
Thank you very much, Diane. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there any other hands before we look at the chat? Anybody would like to make some comments? I think that's Beth Gersh raising her hand. Beth, did you want to say something? No, I don't know. Okay. All right, I think I'll look at the chat.
I just want to say that there's so many more families and stories to tell. It was really hard to narrow it down for this short presentation, but in the exhibition, we will have many more stories to tell.
Yes, we focused on the founding members for this presentation, but as Anna said, there are so many stories to tell, and there's so many interrelationships between families, businesses, and organizations, as well as we can just go so deep in terms of the members from the Newburgh community as well. For example, Samuel Beskin was a member at the temple in Newburgh. He was never able to participate in the synagogue here, but so many of the founding members are buried in Newburgh. So there's all the interconnections with that as well. All of the comments are just positive, wonderful ones, thanking us for the wonderful and informative program. I don't see any questions. Do we have any questions? When is the exhibition opening? We plan to open that sometime in the spring. So that would be on the Beacon Historical Society website information, as well as the Beacon Hebrew Alliance.
Yeah, sign up for our mailing list and you'll be informed.
Anna, can you tell everyone about the blog that you've created?
Yeah, we have a blog on BHA's website that is updated monthly with a different article highlighting a different aspect of BHA history. So we've had articles about religious rituals. We've had articles about the sisterhood, Jewish camps in and around Beacon, and also the religious school and how that's changed over the years. I see Martha Kransdorf has her hand raised.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that was Joe Bloom in one of the earlier pictures. Ellen shaking her head. It looked like a young Joe. Thanks.
I noticed Richie Rosenkrantz works for the Gomez Mill House. Richie, would you mind saying a few words about the Gomez Mill?
Oh yeah, sure. I guess first, but thank you for your presentation. That was really great. What an amazing congregation and community, and what great stewards y'all have of your community and your congregation, keeping this kind of informed thoughtfulness about your history. So, like my friend Diane said, I'm the site director at the Gomez Mill House Historic Site. We're on the Newburgh-Marlborough border, and I recognize some familiar faces here. Hi, Laurel. Hi, Rachel. Jeff. And maybe a few others there's 73 of you on this call, and some of you don't have the pictures, but y'all have come to the Gomez Mill House for, I think, between 15 and 20 years to do our mitzvah day every year in May. Obviously, the last couple of years that hasn't happened, but we hope to get back to that this coming May. That's the plan. The Gomez Millhouse really appreciates the support that the Beacon Hebrew Alliance and Greater Jewish Community continually gives us. We will be reaching out to all of you in the coming year. That's the plan. We'd, I guess, like to maybe do a presentation for you guys, if that would be
Yeah.
acceptable. And I want to strengthen my relationship with your congregation and the relationship that the Gomez Foundation has with your congregation, and try to be, more mutually helpful. We have a lot of history at the Gomez Millhouse, and Louis Moses Gomez is just the first person in a long line of amazing people, and he's not the only Jewish person to have lived at the Gomez Millhouse. There was a really cool lady who lived there like 200 years after him, who was a member of the NAACP, like a really early, like founding era member. And she was very active in fighting for women's equality and civil rights. So we're working on more information about her to broaden our Jewish heritage interpretation. So I guess stay tuned for that. It's like if we can exchange emails or something, or I'll talk with Diane about making sure that we let everybody know about what we're planning to do for next year. And I hope to meet those of you in person who I have not met in person yet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richie. Appreciate it.
Diane, Rick Rosenthal had a question about if this presentation a recording will be available. Can you talk about how that works?
Yes, I will be I did record it, and it will be posted on our website under past events. So you just beaconhistorical.org/past events, or just click on that button. It should be up in the next few days. So that will be available for everyone. I do want to invite any of the families that we mentioned, or in the later the second generation, if you have any materials, ephemera, photographs, any kind of religious artifacts that we could borrow for our exhibit, we would greatly appreciate it. It can be a menorah, a talit, a prayer book, one of your religious school books, anything that would be helpful to tell the story of Jewish history. We would greatly appreciate that at the Historical Society. We would borrow it and return it back to you after the exhibit is over. So you can let us know if you have anything. One of the things I did want to mention when I was researching the different organizations that the Jewish merchants were involved with, what was missing from that information was the fact that they were not members of different unions that were pretty popular in New York City. And my thought on that was that once they came to Beacon and they were working as independent business people, they didn't need to be part of a union or a workers' circle, for example, but that they were part of the Hebrew Alliance, and alliance being the key word of working together from all different countries, different dialects, different languages. So they didn't really need to, I'm making these assumptions that they didn't need to be part of a union for support, but that they had each other, all of the different members from all around. So I think that was something that a little bit more research that could be done on that as well. So were there any other comments or questions or anything you'd like to share? Any memories? I can't see if you have hands up, but.
Or you can just unmute yourself and speak
Yeah,
out.
yeah. Any other comments?
I just would like to thank Anna and Diane. We've been doing this now for we started before COVID, so it's been How many years now we've
It's
been?
been like 4 years.
Yeah.
When I said, the centennial's coming up, and that was like 4 years ago.
Before we knew it, here it is, right?
Yeah, and then it's
Yeah.
pretty
But
quickly.
thank you so much. And, through, all of this work that you've done, it's brought back, so many people from our history together. I met with my Hebrew school class, and reconnected, and the kids from the Hebrew school interviewed us. And, so thank you so much. You don't know how much it means to really remember the people who really created this community for us today. It's still
Well,
here. So.
history is important, and that's why the Historical Society does what it does. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. And I would like to thank Ann Gross and Nancy Sobier. Nancy, I always forget how to say your name. I'm so sorry. Nancy Sobier Mayer for their research and help in our project. So thank you for that. Okay, Anna, thank you to a great partner.
Yes, thank you, Diane. I saw one final question from
Oh.
Rachel Zollner in the chat.
Okay.
She asked, would it be correct to say that BHA was one of the first congregations in the US to be led by a female rabbi? I don't know the answer to that. Ellen, do you know? I know Reform congregations had female rabbis a while before conservative ones did, so.
Yeah, much before. Yeah.
Yeah,
And even-
Sally
Go ahead.
Prisen. I think she was the first ordained rabbi, Sally Prisen, by the Reform movement. And I don't remember when that was, but it was way before the conservative movement ordained rabbis.
Yeah, but we had our BHA's first female rabbi was Carol Davidson.
No, that's not.
No? Oh,
No.
okay, correct me, please.
Yeah, I did not realize Jonina. What was her last name? Shaft?
Nina. Yeah.
I sent you that list, just that update the other day.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Nina, she was before Carol. Yeah.
Yeah, she was the year before Carol, yeah.
That's right.
For 1 year, yeah.
So that was in the late 80s.
Sally Priesand became a rabbi in 1972.
Oh, okay.
And it happens I saw her just before COVID over in Middletown at the synagogue there giving an interesting talk.
Okay, well, thank you for the collective information sharing.
Try.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next meeting in November. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Diane. Bye, thank you.
That was great. Bye.
Bye.